Welcome to The Green Room, a podcast from Furnitubes that explores the outdoor spaces where we gather, connect and breathe. In each episode, we'll delve into the stories behind remarkable public spaces, speak with visionaries who are reshaping our urban landscape, and uncover how sustainable design can transform the places we share. I'm your host, Catherine Barrett. Today we're joined by Alexandra Gomes, who will share insights around exploring urban equity. Hi, Alexandra. How are you?
Hi, Catherine. I'm okay.
Good. Well, today I'd like to introduce Alexandra Gomes, a research fellow at LSE Cities. And Alexandra's work delves into spatial, social and environmental dynamics of cities around the world. So from London to the global south and most recently Kuwait. And we're going to talk about data, equity and climate in the way that we shape and design public spaces and what that means for the future of urban life. So as I said, thank you for coming in, Alexandra. I've been following some of the work that you do on LinkedIn, and we've had a chance to chat about it. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for your invite. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. So first of all, I wanted to ask you about your work at LSE Cities and how it connects to the physical and social shaping of our urban environments. Could you talk a little bit about what you're doing at LSE?
Yeah, so I work at LSE Cities, which is a research center that focuses on how cities shape those who live, who work, and who visit that particular city. And my work in particular, I started as a GIS and data analyst, but somehow evolved into a different, I still do mapping, but a different type of role. And I think mostly what I do is try to compare social spatial inequalities, which means when you implement specific type of infrastructure or when you do investment in a city, how does that reflect differently in different areas, and who is getting or winning from it, or who is not winning from it. So in a way, most of what we do, because the city is such a complex space that deals with infrastructure, with people, with weather, with the environment. In a way, everything we do when we move one piece is a bit like a butterfly effect, right? But not everyone is affected the same way. So that is important to understand. It's also important to understand it's what we do here quite a lot is, cities are growing differently, and what is the impact of different cities growing differently? So, for example, cities in Africa are growing quite fast. Yeah. There's a lot of people coming to these cities from rural areas, or because there's a lot of new children being born. And how are these cities coping in terms of infrastructure? It's important to understand, we need to invest in more hospitals, more education, but then there's limitations of economic and financial limitations. But this similar, or in the opposite side, you have Europe with, aging population, and how can the city then prepare for that, right? Yeah. And how much money, how much investment, where do you prioritize? So it's this type of questions that we ask. And a lot of the times I work with maps and with data and with other tools that I'll probably talk along this conversation that highlight those inequalities and those problems and those challenges.
And so whilst your research is looking at socio-spatial inequality, it's quite a big question, but how can urban designers and landscape architects contribute to more equitable cities? In your research, in your findings, what is it that we can be bearing in mind when we're looking at a problem?
So much. I think a city is like I don't know if you use this expression, Russian dolls. Those dolls that you put inside.
The matryoshkas. Yeah.
Exactly. So in a way, that's a city. So when you deal at the architecture design level, you're influencing the city itself because it's a smaller doll inside a bigger doll. There's a kind of overlapping scale in a way. Yeah. So, for example, In the Middle East, I've been working in Abu Dhabi and Kuwait. I've visited and I taught in Oman. And in all these three cities, you prioritize cars. So cars at the city level is the priority. So the cities are designed for the car movement and not for people walking or people's movement. And in a way, the role of an urban designer is fundamental, because without urban design for people, without creating shades, without adding seating spaces or, spaces for people together, then, car will be the only thing you see in the streets.
Yeah.
So in a way, if you have a good design in cities like this, even if you have a lot of roads and cars are the priority, you will still see some life in the streets. So this consideration of what we felt when we studied it, it's a study that it's a collaborative study, but what we felt is that streets are not public space. And if you start designing it and if you start planning it for people, and urban designers and architects have a big contribution in that, maybe then streets become public space and we'll have a bit of change in these areas of the world, for example.
And are there any communities or geographies or cities that actually you think have been done really well in that respect? So from a people first perspective, I really like the way that, that's it was a big question, but it was a really lovely way of explaining the role of urban designers and also this kind of the people and car kind of conundrum. Are there any places, whether it's been part of your research or that you visited, that you feel is getting that balance and that harmony and that people-focused perspective right?
I feel, to be honest, I never really compared, so it's more my perception. I feel that more than different spaces is before the car, in a way, cities that were designed previously to having cars. And even in Kuwait, you had a very organic city before that was demolished around the 50s. And that was a city, well, a small city, or the scale was small, but it was made for walkability. It had shaded areas, it had courtyards, the architecture of the buildings was different. And when you visit, for example, in my country, when you visit Lisbon or when you visit Porto, they're very, there's issues on the quality of the sidewalks, but they're very walkable cities. In London, maybe also because of we have an extended transport network, but there's still limitations. And it's quite interesting when you go to Covent Garden and they say, please don't take the tube to Leicester Square, just walk.
Yes. Yes.
So walkability is fundamental in the creation of the cities. And there are great examples. London is very walkable. Cities that are organic, that were designed before cars, are very walkable. But still, there's a lot of challenges, even in London, even in Lisbon. But of course, it's comparatively much better than in other places of the world. So I feel that is a balance of what were the priorities when you designed the neighborhood or the city.
That's a brilliant way of thinking about it, before BC and AC. So what do you think are the most overlooked communities or geographies then at the moment, and how can we address that? Is there a flip side to that?
I feel, look, we are in a climate emergency. So I think, putting apart car or no car, it's, what's going on in your city. And a lot of, for example, in the Middle East, there's obesity and there's diabetes, but there's a huge problem of asthma and pollution that affects a big part of the population because also of cars. So I think we can start by discussing inequalities in terms of how are people suffering in the world and where are they suffering? And of course, there's wars and everything else that it's fundamental to discuss, but not my role here. But in terms of, I would pick up on, where is pollution creating events and problems and challenging people, and how can we address that?
Yeah.
And so addressing car use that, has been dominant. And I'm not saying cars are not important. Of course, if you're, you might have a disability and you might need to drive, or you might be an elderly person that can't walk specific distances. I'm not saying cars are not important, but we are using it a bit too much. So in a way, I think thinking of, okay, how is our behavior in terms of car use, in terms of how we eat, in terms of how we behave in general in our daily life, plastic bags in the supermarket, everything that we do has a consequence. But I would also think, how is this affecting where you live, and how can you make it a better space by changing either planning and design or by changing behavior. But I would definitely start by understanding where are the challenges happening, and then narrowing from that.
That's a brilliant way of thinking about it. And I know you've worked extensively with urban data, and how can designers better leverage data without losing the human and the experiential qualities of placemaking? Can you tell us a little bit about how you use data, but how you supplement data?
Yeah, so I think the challenge that I had when we were exploring Kuwait is, how do you explore how people use space and how people appreciate space, but then create data and evidence for policymakers? Because what a lot of the challenge that we have nowadays is, we know we spend too much time in traffic, or we know we don't use the street. So we know some people use it, some others don't, but we don't have the evidence. So creating evidence, which a lot of the times is about data that creates information that can be used by policymakers, is fundamental. And so in Kuwait, we talked to people, but we also observed people, we counted people, and that allowed us to find a way of mapping. So we created maps of users. So what are people doing? We based our type of use on Gail's work, which is a very well-known urban designer. So in a way, by mapping all those users and where people are doing what they're doing, where are they talking, where are they, just on the phone? Are they using shaded areas? Are they using the park? Are they going? We mapped movement along the street, and we showed that, most movement in Kuwait along in the street is not along the street, it's from car to the house and from the house to the car. Yeah. So there's no directional movement because most areas are monofunctional. So you have nowhere to go except your car. There's no cafes. There's some empty plots that can be used for play or some parks, but they have so many challenges that they're not attracting as many people as you want to. So in a way, by mapping movements, mapping what uses, what are people doing, mapping, we also mapped challenges, where are cars parked on top of the area that should be the sidewalk, and when you don't have parks, you have areas that are kind of small allotments or planting vegetations, or you have a lot of beans that are cluttering the small space you have as a sidewalk. So mapping creates that evidence, and it's still something we can do as architects, as urban designers, as planners, as anyone who wants to create evidence to support change.
And so then were there any surprising kind of discoveries or insights from this research that would say challenge conventional wisdom, or that you weren't expecting, or that were pleasantly surprising even?
I remember I told you the last time, geography matters in the way you see it, right? And I think that is something, to be honest, I never really thought about before, that, in different geographies, in different areas of the world, people have more seating spaces, less seating spaces, or no seating spaces. even when you have sitting spaces, they might be located in the wrong place. They might be under the sun, like in Kuwait, in some parks. There's some benches, but they're under the sun. So why would you sit in an area, in a country that is so hot, in an area that is not shaded? At the same time, when I broke my foot here in London, I couldn't find enough places to sit, to rest when I was using my crutches. So, but then, so you need to understand. Another story was a conference that I attended when they were discussing in Scotland sitting as something important. And someone from Canada said exactly what I was thinking. In Kuwait or in Canada, the priority is having a sidewalk. Then we can talk about sitting next.
Right. So first, you need to get the basics.
Need to have people to the streets and then to sit. So I think that is something that came up from my research, how all these inequalities affect us in different ways. But, being in public space is fundamental, and we need the basics. And not everyone has those basics. They often have the potential to create them. And Kuwait has wide enough streets to have sidewalks. It's just a question of changing policies and changing priorities. So, but geography matters in the way you sit and in the way you walk. And that is something that I, it's probably not something completely unknown, but it's something that I started recognizing and seeing it everywhere I go.
Yeah, and I guess you're now aware of, you're looking out for, and also I guess if you're looking at the data mapping is showing what people are doing and when they're doing it, but then when you're talking to them, sort of understanding why a group might congregate in a certain place, what it means to them, and that's where you might discover more than just the data shows you. It's sort of the whys and the why they travel there.
Exactly, because that's how you think as a researcher or as a designer. You need to understand why are they doing that in that place? Because maybe when you're designing, you will try to replicate or to improve or to challenge. So, for example, in my PhD, when I looked into different areas of London around Bishopsgate, and I was looking into sound, smell, and touch, but touch is also sitting, right? Where you sit, you feel cold, you feel warm, you feel isolated. There's the presence of other people close to you, or is good or bad. And there's two different things that I've realized in terms of seating, for example. One was in an area where now they have all these isolated benches that are for one person. Yeah. And I could see a family, of four seated, very isolated, and also it's public space. So you have the noise of the cars. So you can't really speak. You will be like shouting. Right. So the way you design, not only the seatings, but where the sitting spaces are placed is important in how it gathers people. The other example was in Spitalfield Square, where one of my interviewees said, well, I'm not sitting here because I tried it and it's too cold. It's stone. So in a way, the material is is important because it's so cold that you feel uncomfortable. Also, it's hard. And then you don't use it. You don't sit there and you are not able to relax and eat and share maybe a meal with your friend. So it is quite fundamental to think about these things.
But that's interesting because the data, if it was just data, you would just see the data of people not sitting there. But it's the anecdotal, it's the interviews that explain that give you that kind of layer of, or multiple layers of the whys and the what could be done. So so I can see why the two together are really, really important.
Yeah, I feel that you can only explore properly the complexity of urban design or cities with mixed methodologies. So, and we try to do that often at LSE Cities and in my work, because I feel that, yes, data, for example, we have publications where we only have maps and visualizations, but they are aiming at having people and policymakers from these cities to start a discussion,
Yeah.
and they will bring their own knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of, okay, well, we see you're growing quite fast. What are you doing about it? And that's to create a discussion. But when you're researching, I think it's important to have a mixed methodology, because like you say, we might not have use, and we might want, people might want to use it in a way,
Yes.
right? Like that bench, the stone area where, no one is sitting, but they wanted to be sitting. Another project that I'm working on, it shows this, that the idea of use is different from the idea of wanting and also valuing.
Yes.
So, for example, there's an area in a park in London that has not been used, but it's a heritage area. It's a traffic model area where little kids can go and cycle and have the stop sign, and they learn how to drive or cycle a bike in a small model area. And it's not being used. But a lot of we did surveys, and a lot of the people said it's something they really cherish and value in that park. But when you talk to policymakers, they were like, really? We never see anyone using it.
Right.
We thought no one cared about it. We were even planning of maybe finding something else to do with that area. So again, the bench situation or story shows you that, no, the fact that people are not using it doesn't mean that they don't want to use it. And this particular example means that the fact people don't use it, that doesn't mean that they don't value it. And they might not even want to use it, but they value it
and they want it
as
to
a
be
part of
their
heritage, something unique that has that park. So if you don't talk to people, how do you know all these things?
It's a really great way of combining data and insight, definitely. And I think it's really powerful. And so the work that you've done all around the world, because you have done a lot of work and you have been to a lot of cities, is that we've talked about the car. I think you made some really great points, really, I'm not going to say the word obvious because that's not fair, but kind of really straightforward comments about cars and pedestrianisation. Is there anything else in the Middle East and Africa that you think would be interesting for UK-based designers to learn from? We always think about, the Middle East and Africa learning from the West, but could it be the other way round in terms of things that you've seen implemented or that have been there historically for years that you think could be learnt here in the UK?
Well, I think we can always learn from each other. One thing that I realize in Africa is how many people walk, also because of financial situations, economic infrastructure, etc. Why are we also not walking as much? Why do we end up, buying a car or renting a car or using a car when we can and when we can afford? And so in a way, the way in Africa, the way they leave the streets is incredible. Of course, created by this need of using it, but also creates a different type of socialization, creates a different type of livability of the streets.
And life is lived outside more,
and
right?
And life is also, again, maybe the weather has a bit of an influence, but still, I was doing field work. People were looking at me. I could see people playing table football. All I wanted was to join them. In a way, we should definitely look into how can we make public space more lively for socialization. Not because in London a lot of people walk. It's not so much.
We're in our own world.
Exactly. And it looks like we don't have the time frame and the space, also because distances are quite big in London. Every time I have to, that is a very important point here, is scale of the cities. Every time I have to meet a friend in London, it might take me an hour and a half or an hour. In Lisbon, no one goes for lunch or dinner like this and have to go an hour and a half on a train. It's like, no, it's a weekend thing. So again, I think there's different issues, which is the scale of the cities, which is, of course, the weather important, but not fundamental, because you have, in Q8, 9 months of the year, the weather is good. But then how you shape public space through walkability. In terms of the Middle East, what I feel is, I think, the way they care about their families and the way they care about comfort, but then they should translate that into public space. And it's a shame that it's not. But then they have like the souks, which I find it's kind of our market, but designed in Kuwait. It's not that old, but it tried to replicate the old design. And it makes me want to go there all the time.
Yeah.
This mix
of humanity and vibrancy.
Which is also, when you go to Oxford Street, it's too wide, too touristic, it's all about shopping in a way. And if you go to a souk,
movement rather than pausing.
Exactly. And if you go to a souk, I think it's the dimension of the small stalls. It's the variety of, you have food, you have spices, you have, clothes, and it's quite appealing for someone like me.
Yeah.
Also because it's appealing to the senses. If you like these mixtures of, smell something good and you follow.
Yes.
So, in a way, I think we can learn a lot from some of these elements, and try to bring them a bit more to cities like London, for example.
So what I love about the pop-up culture of trying things, having little congregations of pop-up shops or markets or food markets.
They are showing up more and more. I think it's. I always, but in the souk you have. It's almost like as it's not I don't want to say shopping center, because it's a kind of a notion that don't want to go there, but it's where you have a combination of things that it's not that usually in London you have either food or another type of market, like or clothes, separated. And in the souk, it's also part of the city. It's not only pop up, but it's where you
can go there and experience the city. It's experiential rather than transactional, potentially.
Yeah. I think you're translating it right.
Oh, I love that. That's a really, and I like the way that those are examples. Those are two really great examples of how we can how the UK can kind of learn or adapt or develop. And so, is there anything that you've seen, kind of new trends or innovations that you think that really excite you at the moment, that you think we could be paying attention to as we design?
I think the big trend is AI.
Yeah.
And I'm really keen to understand how can AI help me, especially because I just had a discussion with a colleague from another project, and he was saying, I had a discussion on how now AI can explore satellite imagery in a different way. And imagine the potential you have now of creating data. Yeah. My whole life, I struggled to create data. I had to locate in Africa, in Addis Ababa. I had to locate 3,000 photos.
Wow.
To be able to do the maps of the building type and the height of the building. So I had the photos. Where is this photo? And now everything you can geolocate photos so easily. You can even put the photos online through AI, and it probably locates it for you if it has enough information. The other thing is the analysis. So now, if your analysis can be specifically spatial and numerical analysis is so fast, you can spend much more time talking to people.
Exactly. Yeah. Understanding. So getting
exactly.
Getting under it.
Exactly. So I find that, I'm really curious to see how this is evolving and how this can shape a different type of research too. A type of research where AI can't come, because at least until now, they are not talking to us in the streets. They're not in the streets observing us. So we can do that job, and we can talk, and we can spend more time really understanding and talking to people while you have a machine working for you in a way, and making the rest of the process where you used to spend hours and months much more quicker. And I wonder how that it will influence the way we design spaces, and hopefully for better. I still have a positive posture about AI use, but I recognize there's a lot of challenges. Also,
absolutely. But I
we're
think
not there yet.
Not there, but using it for good. And I love the way that it's how to make the analysis richer and more valuable and more applicable. It's, instead of spending, say, I don't know what percentage, but maybe it's 70, 80% of data analysis or data collection, and a smaller portion on the kind of the rich anecdotal piece. It could be much more balanced, or even more on the anecdotal, because you'll have so much rich data that could be processed.
My work as a data analyst, I spend around 80% of my time cleaning data and organizing data. So, literally, I'm occupied most of my time with stuff that, a machine could do, and it doesn't interfere at all with the analysis. And then, so you will save all this time, like transcriptions of interviews and this type of work. It can change research, and it can change design in a way, because it creates it. If a machine can read how people are sitting and how people are emitting, and then you can go and talk to them. Like it makes your life much easier in a way. And I hope it can improve the outcomes of the research. The other thing is, I also see a lot of variations of sittings, for example, of design of spaces cities are more and more aware of how you create public space. And it's quite interesting to see this variation. Before you had the classical square with, a monument in the center, some seating, and now, classical squares became very rare in a way. Each space is designed for people to lay down, or for people to engage, for people to isolate. But in a way, it's also quite interesting to see already changes in design, in the creativity of those who design, and I want to see more and more and more.
Yeah, I completely agree. How you create spaces within spaces of people to be able to use them in different ways, and come together, and also groups of people. I'm really excited about thinking about how groups of people or communities or families can kind of come together rather than an individual sitting on a bench facing forward.
Exactly.
I think that's really exciting. Well, that leads me on to our kind of closing question. But I mean, thank you so much. I love talking to you because I learn so much, and it's you have so much experience, and you're so thoughtful as well in your kind of ideas and your responses.
Thank you.
So thinking of where benches are placed and how they're placed. So we like to ask our guests at the end, if you could place a bench anywhere in the world, where would you place it and why? So I'd love to hear what you would do.
I would definitely. I had a discussion with a colleague of mine, Sharifa, from Q8, and I would definitely try to put a bench, but like a nice, cool bench that will attract people to sit, just like you're curious about it, in public space in Q8, and see if Q8s, because we've realized that a lot of non-Q8s use public space already, but can we bring Q8s also to public space if we create a really cool sitting bench in a shaded area in an obvious public space? So I would definitely, and that's because of my work, of course, I would definitely try that and see if you create something cool and trendy, that it's only a bench, will that attract people to the street and to use the streets or public space when they wouldn't that would be definitely something to try out, even in more than one space, I would say. But that's because I feel that I want to bring people out and to sit together, and parents and kids and grandparents, and I, from all the countries that I've been working on, I think Kuwait is the one that I will try it out first.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alexandra.
Thank you for the invitation.
It's a really fantastic conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.